And on to the subject of finances. This is a smallish bee farmer that I know, and some numbers that he's kindly let me have that based on averages over the last 4 years. And I've listed some costs here and compared them with a mythical 5-hive hobby beekeeper. And these costs are nothing to do with startup capital, nothing to do with buying hives and buying extractors and all that stuff. It's just your day-to-day running costs. So in the case of the bee farmer, we've got significant costs of running a vehicle and fueling and taxing it and so forth. And because he's running around pollinating and moving his hives to crops, I put a small amount in, 12 times 5, 60 quid per year for this guy. So it's just a little bit of petrol. I've assumed that they're not, that a hobby beekeeper's not moving hives particularly, but you probably do use a car maybe to drive to a trade show to pick up some new equipment, or maybe to collect some supers from an out apiary or something. Staff costs, bee farmer has them, hobby doesn't. Then there's feed costs, medication, and so forth. The bee farmer will have discounts on some of the things they buy. So they'll definitely get discounts on varroa treatments and sugar, but they may typically use more of that stuff than the hobby beekeeper. And my bee farmer here, he buys in quite a few queens, and he's also bought in some nukes. But anyway, these are the sort of typical ongoing costs. And the long and the short of it is, for the bee farmer, it's costing him £148 per colony, just to keep the thing going, and maybe for the amateur about £75. And at the bulk price of honey of around about £3.40 a pound, I think it's about 100 quid a bucket of honey, isn't it, for a small bucket? It means that the break-even point for the bee farmer, he needs to make over £40 of honey just to cover the costs. £40 per hive. For the hobby beekeeper, it's less. It's more like £22 per hive. But, and this is a critical difference, my bee farmer here is making a huge average honey crop per colony, because he's moving his bees from crop to crop to crop throughout the year. So his bees are always working and always bringing in honey. And that translates to a cost per pound of his honey of just about £1 a pound. So for every pound of honey his colonies make, it's cost him about £1. Now, with your hobby beekeeper, according to the BBKA honey survey, typically beekeepers make about £25 per hive on average. So that doesn't mean every hive makes £25. That means of his 5 hives or her 5 hives, possibly you get £60 off one and £40 off another, £20 off another, and then nothing off the others. And this translates into a much higher cost per pound of honey. And the way that you make this number go down, the best way is to make more honey per hive. So if you were to have 2 supers of honey on every hive full of honey rather than one, you're almost caught up to the bee farmer in terms of profitability. And of course, any surplus that you make by selling honey at above these prices will go towards paying off some of these costs that you incurred when you set up. So for a bee farmer, they've got huge costs with a honey room, a warm room, the big extractor line, maybe several trucks, and so forth. But even the hobby beekeeper, you've spent a lot of money to become a beekeeper. Hives are not cheap. Bees are not cheap. Extractors, it mounts up. So even though it's a hobby, it's worth thinking about, trying to make your colonies pay their own way. On a different subject, but to do with numbers, is the heating of honey and the production of this thing called HMF. The law says that you must have less than 40 milligrams per kilogram of HMF for it to be sold as honey. That's not much. You have way more than that in jam, golden syrup, Coca-Cola, and so forth. But based on some research done by someone I met in New Zealand a few years ago, who runs Airborne Honey, these are how many days it takes to produce 30 milligrams per kilogram of HMF at these temperatures. And this, you can see how this would be a problem in a hot country. So if you're in a hot country with honey sat around at 30 degrees centigrade, it could be only 100 days before you're at 30 milligrams of HMF per kilogram. And so that's a challenge. But for me, the main challenge with honey and heating is I've got this enormous great bucket of rock solid honey, and I need to put it into jars to sell it. So I have no choice but to heat the stuff. But it's comforting to see that even if you heat it to 50 degrees Celsius, it would still take about 4 days to get anywhere near being in trouble with the amount of HMF. And there's no way you would do that. I typically heat it to around about 46, 47 degrees Celsius for about a day. So I'm not getting anywhere near the danger levels of HMF. And I think heating the honey you'll always lose something, but there's no other way. You have to do that to get it runny and get it into jars. And lots of people don't buy honey if it's granulated. So it is a problem. And it also raises the question of what is raw honey. People use that term, but in all honesty, anyone who's got a significant amount of honey, they're going to have the problem of it's crystallized and I'm going to have to heat it.